kid who grew up in the ICOC after the Henry Creed letter came out. Until the pandemic, I had no clue who Kit McKean or Chuck Lucas were. Being sharp, spiritual pornography, and the pruning were foreign concepts to me. I was constantly told that the ICOC is different now, and that we've changed from our past. But my story will show that it hasn't. My parents were reached out to in the early 90s. Coming from a Catholic upbringing, they were already familiar with Christianity. When they were asked to study the Bible, they agreed. Together, they lead Bible talk discussion groups. Shortly after I was born, the Henry Creed letter came out. Some of their friends left the ICOC, but they decided to stay. They wanted me and my siblings to grow up knowing who God is. As a kid, I loved being involved in the children's ministry. I enjoyed singing the songs and making the crafts. The friends I made back then, I still connect with today. Christmas and Easter services were special. During Christmas services, the ushers would hand out candy canes and everyone would dress up. At Easter, my mom and my friend's mom would dress us up in similar outfits and take pictures. At the end of the service, everyone would get a box of Peeps. When listening to other ex-member Kingdom kids share their stories, many have stated that children's ministry was one of a few positive memories. I think it is because of how sheltered we were until we entered the teens ministry. We were told watered-down stories of the Bible. We knew about the importance of baptisms, but were unaware of the pressures to study the Bible. This isn't the case for everyone, especially the children of leaders and children who were abused while in the ICOC. When I entered the teen ministry, I became more involved with the church. I took notes during the sermon and went to Friday night Devos. During the summer, I attended teen camp and went to family group on Friday nights. Friday night Devos were exciting for me. I didn't really do anything on Friday nights after my sports games. Being able to hang out with my church friends and do a fun activity was the highlight. Being in the teen ministry was the worst of my experiences in the ICOC. There were some good memories, but overall, I would never want to experience it again. I was the first of my siblings to enter the teen ministry, so I didn't know what to expect. As a teenager, there were adult expectations that were forced upon me. I was constantly pressured to study the Bible and become a baptized disciple. My peers and I were expected to know exactly what our spiritual eternity would be right then. Major future life decisions were dictated by what the church thought was best. Me and the other teen girls were objectified via purity culture. There was one lesson in particular that I still think about. At least once a month, the guys and girls would be separated for a purity lesson. The girls were told to dress modestly so that we wouldn't cause the boys to stumble. Guys were super visual so they couldn't help but lust at us. Girls don't struggle with lust because we are more emotional. Our beauty is alluring, so we need to be careful on how we act. God made us this way, and we should save ourselves for our future husbands. The boys were taught to avoid watching porn and how to be godly leaders. These lessons caused me to feel a lot of shame and guilt about my body. I saw several girls get dress-coded during Devo because they were tall or curvy. Teen camp for me personally was a bittersweet experience. I loved teen camp because of the friendships I built and meeting new people from other states. But teen camp was also a reinforcement of purity culture, emotional manipulation, and guilt-tripping over becoming a disciple. When I went to teen camp for the first time during my 9th grade year, I didn't know what to expect because I never went to our camp. My parents couldn't afford it. When I set up my stuff in the cabin, I was unprepared for how dusty the cabins were and the amount of spiders. I was excited to go swimming until I learned what the dress code was for the girls. Girls had to wear a one-piece swimsuit and shorts. The only dress code the guys had was to not wear a loose cutout tank top. Most of them did not follow that rule. Most of the lessons during teen camp were fear-based. They were about choosing to get baptized so that you didn't end up in hell. The leaders would tell us that if you got into a car accident and died, you would go straight to hell. During a lesson on the cross, we were forced to watch a scene from the Passion of the Christ. It was the scene when Jesus was being whipped by the Roman soldier. A teen leader told us that we were responsible for Jesus' torture. Many of the teens were crying and sobbing. I felt bad for the 12-year-olds that were there. Some churches start the teens ministry in 7th grade. After teen camp was over, several of my peers asked to study the Bible. A teen leader asked me to study the Bible and I declined. I thought at the time that I wasn't ready. They left me alone and went on to another person. Now thinking back, I am surprised that I didn't get any pushback from anyone for saying no. When I was ready, I got assigned a discipler and we went through the studies. During the cross study, I didn't cry. Being a kingdom kid, I was familiar with what happened to Jesus and I am not an emotional person. When I was in high school, my history teacher explained to my class the medical account of Jesus being on the cross. It took me 2 years to get baptized. I think me not crying during the cross study and sharing my sexual sin explicitly were the reasons. I didn't masturbate, have sex, or watch porn. I had to make things up so that my disciplers would be satisfied. After I got baptized, I noticed that I was treated differently. Baptized teens were viewed in a better light than non-baptized teens. They got special perks, such as going to teen prom, ushering during service, and singing on stage. When it came time to choose a college, we were told to only look at universities that have a strong campus ministry. I would visit colleges and spend time with the campus ministry there. One of the teens in my ministry chose a school that didn't have a local church or a campus ministry. A teen leader berated the teen and tried to talk them out of not choosing the school. At the time, I was shocked by the teen leader's behavior. The teen leader wasn't paying for their tuition, and their parents were fine with the teen's choice. When it came time to decide which college I would attend, the pandemic hit. For the first time, I had the ability to sit back and reflect on my church upbringing. Church being online was a whole new dynamic. I would watch the pre-recorded Sunday sermon and get on with my day. There wasn't a Friday night devo to go to, or a midweek that I was obligated to attend. I saw firsthand the ICOC's true colors with how they mishandled racial injustice and women's rights within the church. The ICOC has this color-blindness stance of, race doesn't matter, we're all God's children. With the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the attacks against Asian people, many of the ICOC members expected the leadership to address it, or at least have some empathy. But instead, most of the leaders said things like, we need to focus on getting people to heaven. There's a difference between social justice and God's justice. Of course, people were upset by those comments. When Asian people were attacked, nothing was said. With regards to the women's role in the church, the ICOC decided to have group discussions about it over Zoom. A book was even written by various ICOC leaders called The Bible and Gender. Me and my peers were excited that our region leaders were finally addressing the blatant misogyny that women in the ICOC face. But instead, it was male leaders leading the conversation and nothing to address changes were made. General Z and young millennials were fed up with the ICOC leaders not taking their concerns around social justice and other topics seriously. During the pandemic, Wound of My People and the Spacemakers podcast emerged. Wound of My People was created to address at first racial injustice. It later emerged into women's rights and advocating for better treatment of LGBTQIA people. This group aired podcasts like episodes on Facebook Live. A friend of mine told me about them, and I eagerly watched all the episodes. I was happy that people within my generation were advocating for change within the ICOC. The WAMP creators shared on social media that they were disfellowshipped. Someone told me that the leaders from their church saw WAMP as a threat to their image and reputation. You have people who advocate for change within the ICOC, and the leaders who don't properly address things, push them out. At the time, I thought that the leaders not listening to their members and disfellowshipping people unfairly was only a problem within some ICOC churches. In 2022, the Johnsons from the Portland church were disfellowshipped for supporting women in leadership roles. That made me realize that the ICOC only cares about power and keeping the status quo. A couple months later, after WAMP got disfellowshipped, the Spacemakers podcast came out. During the first season, they were more about getting the older generations to listen to the younger generation. They had people like J. Brian Craig and Gordon Ferguson as guests. It was refreshing to hear other people around my age talk about the challenges of being a kingdom kid. Because of them and WAMP, I started deconstructing my faith and experience in the ICOC I also read the Henry Crete letter for the first time. I was disappointed that the issues Henry addressed in his letter were still happening today. My campus ministry experience was mostly positive. I was able to be myself for the first time. While in the teen ministry, I felt like I was under a microscope and constantly monitored. I didn't have to deal with purity culture in regards to modesty. I could wear leggings without being pulled to the side by a leader. The campus leaders were only a few years older than me. The relationships with them were more like a friendship versus an extra authority figure. When the lawsuits came out, my campus ministry had an open forum. The leaders didn't make any excuses, and they listened to what people had to say. During one of the Sunday sermons, I learned about how the ICOC came to be through the Stone Campbell movement. I was shocked because I was told as a child that the ICOC began in 1979 with the 30 would-be disciples. Afterwards, I did a deep dive on the ICOC through the Reveal.org website. I learned about Kip McKean's true character and how the ICC came to be. The only negative experiences I had in the campus ministry was the time-consuming schedule and forced evangelizing. I realized now that the structured schedule of the campus ministry is intentional. There are all of these events planned so that you don't have time to really do anything outside of school. During the week, you have Bible talk, midweek or family group, Friday night Devo, D-time, and evangelizing at some point. There were clubs that I wanted to be a part of but couldn't due to the meeting times conflicting with an ICOC event. I was also spending less time with my non-ICOC friends because I was told as a teen that they could take you away from God. Through evangelizing on my college campus, my beliefs of the ICOC being the one true church were shattered. Prior to college, I had minimal interaction with other Christian denominations. However, Catholics were the exception. When I shared my faith, I met people who were Jehovah's Witnesses, Mennonites, Mormons, and more. They would proselytize back to me. After being witnessed to, I understood why people mostly rejected me sharing my faith with them. In my classes, I wasn't the only non-denominational Christian. My college had several Christian groups doing the exact same thing the ICOC does. Crew was one example. The Rolling Stone article and the lawsuits that came out in 2023 was the straw that broke the camel's back. Whatever indoctrinated and brainwashed hold the ICOC had on me was broken. I was furious, saddened, shocked, and disgusted after reading the article and lawsuits. There is absolutely no excuse for what the ICOC did. All those times about how leaders would say that you need to be ready on Judgment Day and how everyone wants what the ICOC has to offer is infuriating. To learn that some of the leaders that covered up abuse are still in leadership today pisses me off. Many people have been disfellowshipped for far less than this. This was also the time when I accepted that the ICOC is a cult. I heard for years of the ICOC being called a cult, but I never paid any mind to it. I assumed that cults were only the most extreme like Jonestown or the Children of God. I saw similarities in the ICOC after watching the documentary Shiny Happy People on Amazon Prime. After reading Steve Hassan's Bite model, I realized that cults exist on a spectrum. It's about the amount of control a group has on its members and how the group treats people who leave it. The ICOC fits the Bite model down to a T. In fact, the Boston ICOC Church is mentioned in Stephen Hassan's book Combating Cult Mind Control. Now, thinking back about my teen ministry experience, after the lawsuits came out, something stuck out to me. The lack of boundaries between adult disciples and the teens themselves makes it easy for predators to take advantage. Teens were forced to disclose their sexual habits to adults that were not their parents or doctor. If a teacher were to ask a student if they ever masturbated, they would be fired and put on the sex offender registry. At teen camp, male teens were encouraged to share their porn addiction openly to the rest of the camp. A former female teen leader asked me when I was 14 if I was having sex with other boys randomly during a Devo. I didn't tell anyone because I thought it was normal. After reflecting on my experiences in the ICOC, I made the decision to leave. I am fortunate enough to have friends and family members outside of the ICOC. They have helped me tremendously. My non-ICOC Christian friends and family members were helpful with identifying the religious trauma